Shall we start?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Hello again, everybody. We're going to start now, and we have about an hour ahead of us to tackle this third concluding session. Just to remind us all of the context, remember that there are the three axes of the project. It's memory, inclusion, and creativity, that we have tackled them in 3 steps each. The first, the analysis of the academic input for each of the 3 axes. Secondly, a moment of open discussion between all the participants, the stakeholder sessions yesterday, and that today it is about wrapping up a little bit what has been said in the previous 2 sessions. The axis on which we're going to concentrate right now is creativity. And I have 3 gentlemen accompanying me right now here in the panel. It's Arturo Rodríguez Morató, who is, by the way, the coordinator of our project CulturalBase. He will give an overview of what has been said in the preliminary academic session, drawing from the papers that were prepared for this axis. Then I have Jordi Alomar, who also is in the team of the University of Barcelona, and he will draw some initial conclusions from the discussions that have taken place, especially yesterday in the framework of the stakeholder session on the issue of creativity. And finally, but last but not least, I have Nikos Papastergiadis, who will be our respondent. What I mean by this is that after a discussion with all of you, he will react on what has been said. And I'm sure that he will bring in interesting elements to the discussion in his nice and dynamic way of speaking. This is not to take anything from you, right? Not at all, Arturo and Jordi. You have the difficult task of, let's say, putting us in the context. So please, Arturo, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Mercedes, and good morning. Well, we have not too much time, and I will try to be very brief, in fact. Let me say to begin that as in the previous session and in the other concluding session, in this case we will not have a final, completely final list of topics. What we want to have is to advance it in this direction, and I think that we have advanced quite a lot in this. And the key to this advancement, in my view, is try to combine, to consolidate this dialogue. It's the initial concerns and themes and issues that were raised by the papers, but in relation with the reactions and with the suggestions that appeared from other contributors, other the stakeholders, and so we will try to synthesize, not again, because the process has repeated that at different moments, the general, all the aspects deal with in the papers, for example, but to highlight some particular aspects that were answered afterwards, that were connected to the concerns of stakeholders afterwards. Having said this, I begin this very quick summary of these papers. saying that, well, there was 2 sessions, 2 academic sessions, 4 papers, 2 in each of them. And at the first session, there was, in my view, and in this perspective of issues that were afterwards connected to other concerns by stakeholders. There are, I think, two main focus in these papers. On the one hand, in the first first academic sessions, we had 2 papers. One was the paper presented by Matthias and me about how does cultural diversity contribute to cultural creativity in Europe. This paper focus on or deal with many aspects of this relation, cultural encounters and the products and the effects of these encounters in terms of hybridity, cultural hybridity, and frameworks, different frameworks that specifically where this relationship takes place at the urban level, at the European level. But I think it is clear the paper goes around this issue of diversity and creativity, and this difficult but important relation between diversity and creativity. On the other hand, in that session, the contribution by Nikos Papastergiadis was quite close, quite related, was concentrated on multicultural, the title was Multicultural Arts and Cultural Citizenship, a View from Australia. And I think in that case, different models of considering the social relations that made the multicultural societies in which we live were considered in confrontation with other models, intercultural relations, etc. But and also it was highlighted the relation between these conditions of social relations, multicultural social relations, and artistic creativity too. So in both cases, there is this element or this theme as central. Then we had the second session that. In that session, there were 2 papers, one by Philip Schlesinger on Creative Europe, Culture, Economy and Policy in the European Union. And the second one was by Volker Kirber about the unsustainability of creative cities. In this case, the papers, I would say mainly because they covered other aspects, but both of them address the current hegemonic discourse on cultural creativity, with which characterizes by economic slant, and this was a main concern in those papers. And Philip, apart from that, spoken about the relationship, general relationship between economy and culture, taking into account the evolution of cultural policy in Europe and other things. But I would highlight this common concern of on the problems and the difficulties that this paradigm of cultural creativity that is hegemonic today creates for the situation. As for Volker's paper, also makes a critique of that paradigm, in his case, at the urban level. And at the same time, arguing about alternatives. It's an interesting perspective added, the alternative of a kind of sustainable creative paradigm. Quite logically, the debates after the presentation of these papers, I would say, concentrated especially on the second focus, on this discussion with respect to the paradigm, cultural creativity paradigm that is today dominant and is very much conditioned by the economic interests, and this provokes a lot of consequences. And there were a lot of ideas of looking to alternatives and claiming the necessity to find other views that provide important elements that are lacking in the current situation. Well, this is something that we have tried, Jordi and me, to put together in these remarks about, because I would say the papers established initially a critique of this paradigm, and mainly and basically the debate afterwards consisted in asking for more specific steps ahead, for alternatives, for and ways to advance in the direction of create a different view that could be more useful for society in general. So we have established, and we will show now, a kind of list of issues phrased, formulated in different ways. That's not the important, it's not a finalized list, but tries to combine and consolidate different remarks, different aspects that appeared, and we try to go further in this direction of arriving to this final list that we hope to develop later. So we will present now this list. Jordi?
Okay, so thank you very much, Arturo, for this meaningful feedback of the academic stakeholders. Okay, so we have tried to sketch from the stakeholders' feedback in the previous sessions and debates related to creativity the main areas, points of departure of discussion that might deserve further development and research. So why not? Let's address the first proposal from a question. From what perspective do we work? The main issue, underlying language and accessibility problems from stakeholders in cultural relativity might come from the cultural creativity understood from an economic point of view that leads to research on and mainly to policy making for extrinsic effects and perverse legitimation. So therefore, with respect to creativity, there is a need for development of further bases of legitimation and spheres, environments and processes of actuation or action beyond economic framework in a more unifying and holistic theory that distinguishes creativity from innovation. It is important to understand what culture creativity means. We should consider it as an environment not focused on product but for the market, but to research and create knowledge from and for the process in an open-ended way. This is a different approach than what is currently applied under creativity innovation agendas. Creativity might be seen and understood as a research process which might not be achieved. On the other hand, related to the question of how can we define cultural creativity indicators, we noticed that there is the challenge to develop indicators and measures of cultural creativity derived from cultural values in relation with basic capabilities and cultural rights. Are they understood by all the actors? Which are their dimensions? Are they output, impacts, demographics? Which are their sources? The third issue is that the functions of the artist or maybe cultural creator need to be reconceptualized, creating not products but environments and processes, not products but prompting empathy, curiosity, cosmopolitanism, fostering social connections and well-being. It will be important to reconsider the frameworks of cultural creativity under the new paradigm. Institutional spaces like education or creativity centers, social environments, territories, peripheries. And we decided to include 3 questions as a point of departure for opening the discussion. How can a non-economistic cultural creativity be recognized and legitimized? It relates to the first topic we addressed before. And how can cultural diversity fit in cultural creativity? How can cultural heritage be transformed by cultural creativity? So somehow these points are the list of proposals we did, and we, in order to clarify our view of these topics, we created a very short list with the main themes and keywords in order to emphasize, and why not start your intervention, Nikos?
Well, our intention was trying to gather main remarks and main suggestions received from the debate. But of course, this is in a stage of needs elaboration and needs to be even more focused, perhaps, in these 4 topics for the next phase. That's our input to the session.
Very good.
Thank you. I've just seen it. So before handing the floor to you, do you want me to take a number of comments, or so that maybe you can also pull from those? Do you have any reactions right away? Lattice. Was that automatic? Or no, wait, the microphone, please, otherwise. So I think you have seen the thread. There's conceptualizing, the ideas, focus, etc. There's the main 4 themes, and then there are 7, let's say, issues here that feed into the themes.
Just very quick, I really appreciate the way that the elements have been summarized. I have 2 just very small notes. One is, you say cultural values. There are values that are not cultural, just to understand why the word has been used. And the second thing is what in relation to the new role function of creators or artists. That's different. But I think there is something that should be reflected on, is which is a challenge for professionals, is that in a society like the one we are, fragmented, they should be demanded also to be enabler of other people's artistic capacity expression. I recall last year a conversation with Chris Sitz and Mihaly about artists enabling people in jail to express themselves through artistic means and becoming that way part of a community which were prevented. And I think this is a full new spectrum of activity function that artists should be, triggered to think on, because that is related to the necessity for the human being as a single being to be able to express himself or herself artistically. And in a way, this professionalization of the expression has been gone that far that you no longer have it for a large part of disenfranchised people. So I just drop it that way, but it's a line of thinking.
Thank you. I have a couple of hands. Lars, Sabrina, Nair, and Augusto. As well.
I just want to
Cornelia?
suggest to add into the list, which I find very helpful, not a new point, but maybe two new terms, which I don't see yet. One is artistic research, which I think is a translation of many of those points, which would be helpful to look at, because there's a lot already developed, especially when it comes to indicators and measures of cultural creativity. I mean, there's just a lot of material on the shelf already, but framed as artistic research, and especially if you want to research cultural creativity, you should maybe also apply different research means which come from the sector. That's one remark. And the other term I'm missing is cultural and creative industries, especially if you talk about the economic aspect and factor of it. Then the question which was raised yesterday also and discussed about the distinction between creativity and innovation is something that's heavily discussed within the sector, especially the art schools also, that educate artists, producers, whatever, for not only a means in society, but also to simply find a job and earn their living.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sabrina?
my comment is following on Lars' comment. I've been, I don't know if this is taking us on another direction, but I've been struggling in these days in where to fit the question of cultural heritage industry. That in all our countries, in all our cities where we come from, there's a big industry since many, many years. And I don't know if it is within the interest of this project or not to discuss about this and to discuss, and then if it is the research stream, or should be rather be in the inclusion part. But just to give you the anecdote, which is on the back of my mind when I think about the tensions in the cultural heritage industry, is an anecdote that I discussed with some of you over lunch. And last week, the Italian government, I'll be brief, but last week, the Italian government has decided by executive decree, which is the fastest, the quickest, the most autonomous way to implement any reform, decided that museums in Italy of some crucial archaeological sites, for example, are essential services like hospitals. So this means that on one side is a huge acknowledgement of the cultural heritage of Italy, and arguing that people are coming from all around the world to see, to enjoy our monuments, and they cannot be disappointed in ever finding our monuments closed. So they should be open as much as possible. That was actually a reaction from the government to was not a strike, was an assembly by the workers of the Colosseum. They are not paid since almost 1 year for the extra time they're working. So they request, which is by law possible, to have an assembly of 2 hours. So the Colosseum opened, instead of 8 o'clock in the morning, opened 2 hours later. So basically defining our cultural heritage, something so important like health in Italy, then it has a huge impact on the functioning of the care industry and on the social inclusion of the workers. Because when we talk about artists, but there are so many people, thousands of people in Italy that work on an everyday basis in the ticket offices of the museums. And sometimes I know people with a PhD in art history that in the end didn't find a job in the academia, and they work in the ticket offices to be anyway in some ways connected to art. So.
Thank you. I have a number of hands, so could you please, focus and concentrate? Keep it short. Thank you. Go ahead.
I think that there's a need for a vocabulary that is common and understood. I think cultural creativity, I don't understand as opposed to just creativity. We talked about creativity and innovation. We've heard cultural creators, artists. In the economic paradigm, it's cultural workers. I think that the economic framework has been useful in that it has given us a vocabulary of creative and cultural industries, cultural workers, that has gone beyond the artist. So that's my one point.
Thank you.
The second point, though, is I'm extremely concerned about number 3, and I'm not sure if that's really what we said. I'm not sure if we can really give a role to artists or make them do anything other than create whatever art they want to make. I think that we can rethink the role of cultural workers, cultural institutions, with respect to the broader society, be health, education, economics, whatever. But it worries me extremely much to see this focus on a prescriptive role of what an individual artist can do in society.
Okay, now I have Augusto.
Okay, thank you. I would like to suggest rephrasing of point 3, just in this term, rethinking the roles of cultural creators and mediators. And the reason is, if we want to found our agenda on a non-economicist paradigm, I think it's essential to take into account the issue of cultural mediation. Just my suggestion.
Thank you. And Nasser.
Yes, thanks. I want asking 3 transversal questions. The question 1 is, what kind of where is cultural creativity? You're talking about Europe. If you're talking about Europe, what kind of Europe? You're talking about the Europe inside, or Europe in the world? If you're talking about Europe in the world, cultural creativity, what kind of linking about the world, about the context, geopolitical context, historical context, the role of globalization? It's my one question. Second question about the question of cultural creativity and the relation between a social class. It perhaps is more archaistic, my point of view, but I ask this question, is the question of the social group and the role of the making of cultural creativity and the representation and social power to making cultural creativity. And three question, more archaistic perhaps, is the role of the politics, the role of the states in the making of cultural creativity. Thanks.
Thank you. I think I have Cornelia. No, sorry, I'm Cornelia, and then yeah.
Go ahead.
However we define creativity and innovation, there is a coherence between them. Given the 2013 goals Mercedes mentioned, innovation, the term of innovation is one of the most quoted,
Yes.
mentioned terms. This brings me to 3 comments. First comment, we need, I think, from our sector, the culture and creative sector, a critical reading of this agenda. Secondly, what creativity and innovation means in non-cultural sectors is better understood than in our sector. Therefore, we have to put care to the debate on innovation and put it maybe, and creativity also, at the heart of our own concern, what's just going on and not lie behind other sectors. And finally, third comment is, I've never heard somebody to talk about creative culture policy issues or creativity in culture policy. This is maybe also an issue, a topic we could discuss, but it is another conference.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. This idea of creative industries has been written to death for the last 15 years. It comes over and over. It's used over and over since Tony Blair. So I'm a little bit tired of repeating these kind of statements again, that creativity has to be related to an economic framework. It has been used, as I said, over and over again, so I'm object a little bit. I don't look at you now, I look at in general, okay? I'm very happy that I had a chance to, in my presentation, enlarge, which is the point one, enlarge the discussion beyond the economic framework and see what this word of culture, and I agree with you, with respect to the topic of vocabulary. You have to define what is cultural creativity, for instance, with respect to artistic creativity. I talked a lot about artists, which brings me to point three. I think it is worth to, we can rephrase this word, rethinking the role of cultural creators, rethinking the function of artists in an urban development and in a creative city context. So that's something that I think is necessary. Otherwise, we come back to a very old 19th century role of artists being autonomous. They are not autonomous. They are part of the society, and they play a role in society as creative workers. On the other hand, I agree with you that we should not just throw out the baby with the bathwater and say that we do not want to talk about the economic impact anymore. I don't say this. I think it's important. But it is important to go beyond the economic framework. And if I look at these, there are already 7 questions here, quite a lot. To look not only beyond the economic framework, but to look at, and this is the plea I gave in my own presentation, to look at certain norms that come out of the sustainability discourse, the ones I proposed in my talk, the different ideas I proposed. So yes and no. My first plea, yes, go beyond the economic framework. Yes, go beyond the creative industries propaganda that came out for the last 15 years and see what else can we do. And I just propose to go towards sustainability discourse. And yes, think about the role and the functions of artists and creative workers in this round.
Thank you. And I will, yes, the last
yes,
one.
I don't know if it is to rephrase some things that are already in this list or other things, but I think it is perhaps necessary to be more explicit about cultural rights in relationship to artistic and cultural creativity, because cultural rights are considered for some actors as an opportunity and for others as a danger for cultural creativity. So I think that there is an important issue about for research to deepen this relationship between both. In relation to this first idea, the second idea would be to be more explicit about public participation in this kind of process of change of paradigm in cultural creativity and artistic creativity, and in relationship to our colleague just at this moment, to deepen the new social function of arts in this new perspective of new responsibilities for public in cultural and artistic creativity. Thank you.
Thank you. One last. Carol.
I will be very short. As a artist, I would ask the researcher to make a project analyzing the role of residencies for cultural, artistic, and then creativity, and maybe the social impact of residencies where they are.
Okay, thank you. Wow. Wow. 9 people have taken the floor, and a number of issues in each contribution. I have tried to condensate what you have said, and I would ask Arturo and Jordi and finally Nikos to possibly react on this. To my understanding, and again, apologies if this is an attempt, There is here an issue about terminology, creativity versus innovation in broad terms. It does not only have to do with how we understand these terms, it has to do in also in how these terms, are interpreted in a given set of frameworks. One of them, which we do not have to forget, is the normative framework, and within this normative framework, the different agendas, including the one on sustainability, which includes also the issue about rights, cultural, human, as we have said before. And related to this issue of terminology, I take the point about research. Research has to be possibly, how can I say, if I got it right, it has to include also other perspectives, not only the ones that we are maybe used to, but also other methodologies. The second issue is the one regarding cultural creators. Cultural creators not questioning what we understand with the word, again, or the term artist, not the substantive part of their role, but rather how they relate either with other sectors in terms of what is the work that they do, how does it contribute to other sectors, but also beyond. And linked to this, it's the issue about employment. We're finally talking also about people who work and what are their conditions of employment. Third is industry versus public service. Industry relates to what has come up earlier also about commercialization, etc. Cultural and creative sectors are seen as an industry sector today, but they possibly should have also a vocation of public service in certain contexts. And finally, which makes me link to the first issue, the issue of policies. We do not have to forget that this is about a research agenda indeed, but also about a policy agenda. And within the policies, we have to think about the modes of participation today and what do these generate as also new modes of participation, which makes me link back to the issue about rights, because as has been pointed out in the previous session, Article 27 of the Human Rights Declaration says that access to culture and participation in culture are fundamental rights. Right. That's it. Arturo, Jordi, please, if you can focus on these four elements and fire back to the audience.
Well, there are many points to take into account, but my understanding is that most or many of these remarks can connect quite well with the general ideas that are behind some of these points. I would say on the one hand, there are concerns about the inclusion of considerations of social class, for example, and social groups. I would say that this should be taken into account as a very important aspect in this new view on cultural creativity. Is something to be included there, but it is the place. And in another sense, is related to another aspect that is probably not very clear in this, but indirectly is present there. Is the question also evoked for some of you of power, and I would add conflict and tensions and struggles, etc. That I think in our initial proposal is included in this point. I don't remember the number of the point, but it's the point focusing on frameworks of social frameworks that organize creativity in new spaces, new institutional spaces, and here can be included residencies, for example, that was mentioned, and in relation with education, and here there is a space for taking into account relations of power that in this new view should be rethought in a way, in some way, making a critique of the existing relations that operate in the frameworks today. Well, another thing is some other remarks were about the necessity of refining terminology, for example, or questioning the reference to cultural values instead of values simply, or all these aspects should be part of this general reflection of trying to reconstruct another view of cultural creativity. In my view, this is only a first attempt to put elements around in defining more or less general themes. But of course, everything there is provisional and is under evaluation and criticism. Another issue, important issue in my view, is that it is quite clear that there are a lot of overlappings with other axes. And I think this is something that is not completely we need to work on this yet. And now with this list and this effort that we have done, I think we will be in a better position to look at this question and to see, for example, if some concern can be more better covered under another axis or under this one. So, for example, in relation with heritage, obviously, perhaps what you said, imagine that could be perhaps more better covered by the axis on memory, but it depends. It should be addressed, I think, but I don't know exactly how it should be addressed. Well, I don't know if I answer everything, but it's my first reaction. It's not nothing else.
This is what it is about. So thank you very much. Jordi, would you like to add or just pass on to Nikos then? Would you want to contribute to this session? Final concluding remarks?
Okay, thank you very much, Mercedes. And I should also, before I begin my concluding remarks, express my thanks to Arturo and to Jordi for their invitation to participate in this very stimulating event, and also to thank them for their hospitality. In particular, because last night we got finally a definition of one of the key terms, stakeholder. Arturo was the stakeholder. Sorry for that stupid remark. But now let me get on with my real job. What we've seen, I think, is a meeting of two worlds. The world of academia, which was concerned with, at least in the 4 papers that we circulated, an attempt to map debates, discourses and policies. And through that mapping to clear away misconceptions and identify dead ends. But also in the responses from the stakeholders, there was a request for a kind of concretization, application, and the mobilization of tools for the defense and definition of concepts in a public arena. So that produces a kind of interesting conflict. On the one hand, the request for a consensus in terminology is a utopian fantasy we all hang on to and can't get over but never fulfill. So let's accept that that's impossible, but we continue reaching towards it. But on the other hand, we also saw a request for the development of a meta-narrative, a new normative discourse. And this new normative discourse is there to bring back value in what seems to be a world without values. But I'm not sure we're in a world without values. It's just that we don't agree with many of the values that are being proposed, and which have seemed to have become dominant. So these trajectories illustrate the tensions and the challenges before this group. And what it therefore produces is a challenge, first of all, of perspective. The challenge to zoom in and then to zoom out, to see with indicators and other measuring devices the capacity to produce evidence of value, but then also by zooming out to produce a narrative, a new conceptual framework that can incorporate that evidence into a meaningful, cohesive, and plausible account. Now, in Arturo's paper with Jordi, they identified a concept and said that is perhaps the most widest concept for speaking about cultural production, which is hybridization. So I'm going to use this concept because I agree with you about its utility and its breadth and its versatility. And I'm going to try and use this concept now to address 4 topics, which in a way have already been speculated and described and requested for further research. Hybridization in the past was primarily used to thinking about people's subjectivity, the fact that they came from diverse origins and having that diversity in their past meant that their self-identity and process was formed through mixture. It was also used as a way to rethink the objects of cultural production, artworks or symbols or narratives, etc., to say, look at the mixture that has gone in the production of that work, either in formal innovations or in substantive content terms. What I think we also see is how hybridity has also been utilized as a way of sharpening our understanding of critical thinking by comparing this with that, the near with the far, and so on and so forth. Now I think we can think of hybridization perhaps in slightly more complex and concrete ways, and I'm going to propose it as a sort of meta-concept over these 4 topics. The first one is territories. And this could be one of the themes that combines this. We've already talked about how cities have been reconfigured in the context of gentrification. We used to think that creativity focused and concentrated itself towards the center of the cities. Now it's increasingly being dispersed to peri-urban spaces and to remote spaces. Connectivity through technology has enabled these spaces to not feel isolated, but to be actually connected in new networks. So that produces, first of all, a new challenge of identifying the sites where cultural productivity occurs. So that's the first thing, is identifying the sites, but then also tracing the formation of these horizontal networks rather than the centripetal ones. So that's my first suggestion. The second one is about artistic practices and recognizing the participatory dynamics that are increasingly shaping artistic practices. And again, hybridity and hybridization is really useful when we recognize the importance that's increasingly used around the concept of remix. How the process of production, consumption, and dissemination are not discrete and distinct and separate stages where different people are doing 1, 2nd, or 3rd of these stages, but in fact the same person is doing all 3. And that also brings back to the fore the overarching and bleeding role of mediation throughout all of those three stages. So we think of hybridization, again, it's very useful for rethinking the way artistic practice and cultural consumption and the physical dissemination has become interconnected and mixed up. My third area of focus around hybridization is, and this is closer to Philip and to Volker's presentations, is around the ideas of policies. Now, in terms of cultural policy and creative policies, etc., it's critical to think about what is the object of attention. If the object of the policy is an artwork in the traditional notion of a painting or a film, then it's a discrete object. But what if, as increasingly has become, it becomes bleeded again, mixed up with a wider set of industries, and so that the cultural and the digital has not only just added more media, another tool, another platform, but has actually transformed the modality of production, consumption, distribution, right? And so in that sense, the emphasis now that Creative Europe has given to the media sector has not just expanded its sphere of influence, but has also disrupted the traditional boundaries that we've utilized since the 19th century for defining what art is and what other forms of cultural production are. So in a sense, we could also think about the way in which cultural policy has also been hybridized as the objects of attention, regulation, and control and support have been, again, redistributed. And so what we see through this redistribution is a new set of value claims and through these new value claims, a relocation of authority. And that's what neoliberalism has effectively achieved, a displacement of authority. And this brings me to the fourth dimension of this hybridization issue, which is the economies. Because we've had a lot of discussion about the need to go beyond, as Volker says, the neoliberal model. And part of the reason we often talk about that is the abhorrence that many of us express towards the lack of moral or cultural value in that economic model. I would suggest that it's not a lack, it's just a different. All economic models and theories carry with them a very, very specific moral universe. Now, what I think we've also seen in the formation of this new neoliberal model is a request to go beyond the bourgeois model of artistic practice, a demand to go beyond the state-supported artistic models, and in a way to hijack some of the rhetoric of the avant-garde and redefine it into a new kind of instrumentalist ideology. What it's achieved in the meantime is a dissolution of the old ideological discourses. And so therefore the definition and defense of culture has moved ground. And that produces a certain kind of melancholy for some of us and disillusionment, but it also demonstrates how the ground has substantially shifted from under our feet. And what we've often witnessed is the impossibility of having a moral, rational argument in the context of a neoliberal agenda, because the neoliberal agenda often is impervious to the kind of evidence and normative arguments that we have asked ourselves to produce. On the one hand, one of the requests from the stakeholders is help us get the tools that gives us the evidence, and then help us build a narrative that enables us to make a case for art and culture, which presupposes a normative mindset that with the right evidence and the right story, we could pitch a case that defines and defends the value of art. I would suggest to you that it's worth thinking in these new economies of hybridization, that what if they don't care that you've got the evidence and narrative that's now making a case for art? What if they just don't care that the normative viewpoint has any value at all? It's a question, because I've already seen it operate in other spheres. So in that case, you only got two other options. Affective discourse, that is, power of seduction through art, or violence. So this is the only way in which you can take power. If rational normative discourse has been dislodged and disempowered in the public arena. Anyway, these are my 4 thoughts about hybridization, and hopefully they're of some use to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. I think that we can leave it at that. It's a very nice way of ending this session. Food for thought. And thank you to the 3 of you. And Arturo, you guide us through now the last leg of the workshop. Thank you again.